get us to this point. Some of those things you can see, some of them you just can't see. And for those of you that are here, what used to be my office is now like an audio video control room back there. And the amount of wires and the different things, I just say thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing that and being a part of that. Well, last week we were together at a drive-in service, and we were talking about mothers and looking at Mother's Day, and we looked back into Genesis, and we saw the life of Hagar. And we saw that God didn't abandon her, and we learned and for some of you it's something that we learned. Some of you it's something that you've known for a while, but the name of God, El Rohe, and it just means the powerful God who sees you. And I just want to say, now that I can look into your eyes, I want you to know that throughout this time, and I know that some of you have lost your jobs. In fact, for two different people, while we were working together this week, they got the phone call that they had lost their jobs. Like, not just like, hey, I heard about it. No, they literally were here working when they found out this information. And I want you to know that God sees you. In the midst of all that you're going through, in the midst of uncertainty in your life, in the midst of uncertainty in your work situation, in the midst of uncertainty in your marriage, God sees you. El Rohe, He's the powerful God who sees you. But I want you to understand this too. Just because He's a powerful God doesn't mean He's not a personal God. That's one of the things last week that we saw, is that Hagar said, I've now seen the God who sees me. I've now had the chance to see the God who sees me, the very personal God who sees me. And so God has seen you through all of this time. And I just want to encourage you this morning to be reminded of that, regardless of what this upcoming week holds, to be reminded that God sees you. Well, today we're going to get back into Matthew chapter number 5. We've been going through a chronological study of the Gospels. We've been in the Sermon on the Mount for a while now, and it's just taking us a while to work through it because we want to learn all that we can. So in your Bibles, Matthew chapter number 5. Matthew chapter number 5. We're going to start reading in verse number 33. We're going to read down through verse 37. I want to remind you of the pattern that has been established previously. The pattern goes like this. You have heard that it was said, and you get an Old Testament standard. Not a bad standard, but we've come to understand that it is the low bar, right? And so God says, here's what you need to do. And so as Jesus comes onto the scene, He gives us these 6 units and 6 challenges, if you will, and we are in the 4th of those challenges. You have heard that it was said, but I, Jesus, tell you, and we're going to pick up in verse 33. Again, you have heard, this is Jesus speaking, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths that you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, again, this is Jesus saying, you've heard Old Testament standard, now He's going to give you something higher. But I tell you, do not swear at all. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment. You can leave the verse up. This isn't talking about using foul language. This is talking about saying, I swear to God, this is the truth. I swear on my dead mother's grave, this is the truth. That's the swearing it's talking about here. Jesus says, I tell you, don't swear at all. Either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. And some of you are saying, I can. Well, you make it look that way, but you don't actually make that hair change colors. Verse 37 says this, simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond that is from the evil one. And so we look at this and we kind of back up and we say, okay, when we're studying this passage, we need to understand the former standard. And it wasn't a bad standard, still a standard from God. And it says, hey, don't break your oath, but keep your oath. Keep the oaths that you have made to the Lord. Now, I don't use the word oath very often. In fact, it doesn't even roll off of my tongue very fluently. And I would imagine most of you, whenever you're talking about just general life, you use the word promises. Even whenever you talk about marriage vows, you probably use the word vows more than you use oaths. I still have a hard time with that word, oaths. It just sounds a little bit difficult. But let's understand what the word oath means, okay? So the word oath, it's simply defined, it's a formal promise. And you might understand some of these oaths from, let's say, an oath of office. Or you might understand it from, some of you have taken the Hippocratic Oath. And so it's a promise that medical professionals take. And so it's a formal promise that binds an individual to a pledge, to something that they have pledged. And again, when we're talking about that marriage oath, we usually call it a vow that somebody has made. And so we have understanding of those in life. The Hippocratic Oath, the presidential oath of office, you take an oath. Even I think congressional members take an oath. We won't get into that, but nevertheless, right? Nevertheless. When you go into the military, you take an oath, right? When you testify in court, you typically have to place your hand on the Bible. And do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? So help you God. I do. Whatever that might be. And so we understand to some degree the concept of an oath. It's a promise, a formal promise, something that you're able to go and say, okay, I am going to make sure that this is what I hold myself to. Now, we need to understand the difference between what I would call societal vows or societal oaths and personal oaths. I don't believe that what Jesus is addressing here are societal vows or oaths. In other words, I don't think he's saying you shouldn't stand and pledge yourself to your wife or to your husband. I don't think he's saying you shouldn't make an oath like that. I don't think he's saying that you shouldn't take the Hippocratic Oath. I don't think that he's saying that you shouldn't take an oath of office. I don't believe that he's saying you shouldn't place your hand on the Bible and say that you're going to tell the truth. Those are what I would call societal oaths. Those are things just generally accepted practices. It really has very little to do with someone questioning who you are. But what Jesus is addressing here is on the personal end of things. Taking an oath or taking a vow to say, I'm going to do this. And you make a vow to the Lord. You make a vow to someone else. And you say, okay, as God as my witness, this is what I'm going to do on a personal level. I don't think he's talking about there's other societal, but a personal level. And we understand, I think, just in reading this, the general concept, right? You should be known as a person of truth. You should be known as a truth teller. Because remember, we're talking about old standard, and think about this for a moment, because I started to process this week. Lowest standard, right? So we have the low standards listed. Don't murder, that's a low standard, okay? If you can't live up to that one, that's why you just get in jail. It's just what happens. Don't murder, that's a low bar, okay? It's not even a hard one to follow. But don't murder. In your marriage relationship, don't commit adultery. Again, that's a low bar. Whenever we were talking a few weeks ago about if you give a divorce, you have to give a certificate of divorce. The standard is not, hey, go ahead and get divorced. The standard is you have to at least treat the person with respect through this process. But again, that's the lowest possible bar. And now we get to the lowest possible bar, and we say, and get this, because the lowest possible bar is now, you should at least keep your vows. You should at least keep your oaths. If you're going to make a promise, follow through with it. But in our society, I don't even know that we often measure up to that low bar, the lowest possible bar. Like, as a society, we're not known, oh man, we're just a people of truth tellers. I tell you what, when I go into work, I expect to hear the truth. When I turn on the news, I expect to hear the truth. Like, when I talk to someone else, I expect that they're just always going to tell me the truth. Like, our society doesn't live up to the lowest possible bar. And Jesus says, I guess even before I go there, we as believers, how often do we not even live up to that lowest possible bar of being a truth teller? Like, okay, they're going to tell the truth. They're going to keep their promises. If they make a vow, if they make an oath, they're going to follow through with that. Statistics would say marriages among Christian couples end in divorce at the same rate as those who aren't Christians. How can that be? How can that be? How can it be that we have become, even as followers of Jesus, those who say, I'm going to allow Jesus to be the standard in my life? How is it that we've gotten to a point where we say, yeah, I made that promise. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I know that I said that I would do that, but I just can't. It's kind of like, I feel like it's kind of like this. I had a teenager one time who said to me, he's like, Pastor Dave, I'd never lie to you at church. I'm like, so you'd lie to me outside of church? He's like, well, I mean, I just feel like at church, like I definitely wouldn't lie to you at church. And I'm like, wow, okay. Like, you want to talk about a low bar? That's a pretty low bar, but we tend to live that way, and they lived that way back then, because what used to happen was this. Someone would make a vow, and we can look back into the Old Testament. We're going to do that together, a couple passages. There's a passage in Leviticus, and there's also a passage in Numbers. And so if you have your Bibles, you can look in Leviticus chapter number 19, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus chapter number 19. And we're going to see where this original standard came from, Leviticus 19. And we're going to look down in verse number, Leviticus 19, I believe it's verse 12. Yeah. Do not swear falsely by my name. In other words, don't make an oath. Don't swear by it. Don't say this is going to happen and then it be a false thing. Don't swear falsely by my name. I swear to God, I'm going to do this. Don't do that. And so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Don't do that. He's saying it's not even just on your reputation. On my name, you're making these oaths, you're making these vows, and then you break them, and it says, when you do that, you profane the name of your God. It's not just your reputation. Now listen, God's reputation is flawless, but how we represent his reputation in this world, let's be honest, Christians do not always make it appear as if God's reputation is flawless. Because if people are looking to us as image bearers of Christ, as reflections of him on this earth, and they're saying that person says that they are a follower of Christ, and they lie as much as anyone else, you know what that ultimately does? It points back, and people draw a conclusion about who God is from that. I had a conversation, it was either yesterday or the day before, I can't even remember who it was. I got a phone call, and this person was relaying to me about how something that happened as a result of Christian leaders years ago. that this individual still looks back and says, I won't go to church because of those Christian leaders and what they did. And I said to this individual, I said, I wish I would have a chance to talk to them, because even in the midst of people not representing God appropriately, God can bring about good. God can accomplish his purposes. But as it said there in Leviticus, listen, when you swear falsely, when you say, I swear to God, I'm going to do this, when you stand there and you take an oath or you take a vow, and then you just treat it as if it's nothing, it says, you profane the name of your God. If you look over to Numbers chapter number 30, so you're in Leviticus already, you're only one book away. Numbers chapter number 30, and you look in verse number 2, it says, when a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything that he said. When someone takes an oath, it says very clearly, he must not break his word. He must do everything that he said. And I just want to say, whenever Jesus was looking back on this, and he's saying in Matthew 5, you've heard that it was said that you need to complete your oath. Jesus is saying that's the low bar. The low bar. And he's about to raise the bar. So some of you that are here this morning, you say, I thought telling the truth was a high bar. No, telling the truth is the lowest possible standard. For you children that are in here, I want you to know that telling the truth to your parents is the right standard. It's the only standard. It's the acceptable standard of behavior. You say, well, okay, I'll just lie to my brother or sister then. I'll tell my parents the truth, but I'll lie to someone else. And that's kind of how they were treating this standard. Because look, if we're in Matthew 5 again. If you look back there to Matthew 5, they eventually decided, and what the religious leaders would do is they would take this and they say, okay, well, it said, if you swear to the Lord that you're going to do these things, then you have to keep your oath. So if you swear on something else, then you don't have to keep your oath. And you have to remind yourself of what the religious leaders, what the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, what they were trying to do. Do you remember what they tried to do? If you don't remember, look back to Matthew chapter 5, verse number 20. Matthew 5:20. Do you remember what it says? Jesus says, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. What the Pharisees and the teachers of the law did is they tried to set up this set of standards that made them look self-righteous, made them look like they were really following God, and they felt good about themselves. They're like, okay, I'll look at this righteousness that I have. I only break my promises if I swear on Jerusalem. I only break my promises if I swear on heaven. I didn't swear using the name of Yahweh, the one true God. I just swore on heaven, or I swore on earth, or I swore on Jerusalem, or whatever they decided. And so it's not, I don't have to hold myself to that. And I'm still righteous. But what did Jesus say? He says, your righteousness, if that's what it is, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Because God's not looking for self-righteousness. He's not looking for people who can pat themselves on the back and say, look what I did. God is looking for changed hearts. He's looking for changed hearts, not some external conformity to a set of rules or regulations. And that's what Jesus does here. He raises the bar. He raises the bar, and it's not so high that we can't meet the bar. It's not high at all. It's something that we can attain to. How do we attain to it? We submit to the leading of the Lord in our life, and we allow Him to change us from the inside. Because here's the crazy thing. When He changes the inside, you know what also changes? who we are on the outside. I talk differently because of what God has done in my heart. I treat people differently because what God is doing and has done in my heart. I am a different worker because of what God has done. We go to this passage, I tell the truth and I keep my promises because of what God has done in me. And here's where we ultimately get. Back in Matthew 5, here's where we ultimately get. We get to a point where we realize that whenever Jesus calls us to this higher standard, he's doing that because that's who he is. Jesus is a truth teller, and not just a truth teller. Jesus is the truth. In fact, if you looked at Matthew, or if you looked at John chapter number 14, and we're going to get to that here in a moment, verse number 6, many of you have this memorized, right? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the truth. I'm calling you to be people who tell the truth. You are to be known as a truth teller. What's your reputation? What's your reputation? I want you to think about this for a moment. What's your reputation, you young people? What's your reputation with mom and dad? Do they know that if you say you're going somewhere, that's where you're going? Do they know that if you say you're going to do something, that you will get it done? Or do your parents know you as someone who rarely tells the truth, who rarely keeps their promises? Let me say this to you, young people. There is no magic switch that when you get a certain age, all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I need to start telling the truth. No. Build it into yourself. Allow yourself to be a truth teller. But Pastor Dave, if I would tell the truth, do you know how much trouble I would get in about that? Be a truth teller. Probably all of your parents have said these words. You'll get in a whole lot less trouble if you just tell me the truth than if I find out you lied later. Right? Maybe some of you young ones haven't heard that, but all of us adults, we heard that, right? We heard that growing up. Tell me the truth at the beginning, it'll be a whole lot better. And every one of you had this go through your mind. I don't know if that's right. I think I'm still going to get in a lot of trouble. You might. But we develop in ourselves this idea that, well, in certain situations, we don't need to keep our promises. We don't need to be truth tellers. We don't need to be promise keepers. It's just with this person. It's just work. I can blur the lines a little bit and not really tell the truth. Not really keep my word. Not hold myself to the standard of, if I make a promise, I'm going to keep that promise. It's a bad place to be whenever you develop a reputation as someone who can't be relied upon. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but all of you know some people who you just don't trust. They don't keep their promises. They'll make a promise, and then if things get difficult, if things get tough, if situations change, I'll just break my promise. And then later on, it'll be all right. People will eventually get over it. No, you establish who you are. And Jesus says here, listen, you've heard it was said, don't break your oath. I'm going to tell you, don't swear at all. Don't swear by heaven, for it's God's throne. Don't swear by the earth. It's his footstool. Don't swear by Jerusalem. It's the city of the great king. It all goes back to him anyway. The earth and everything in it is his. He's saying, don't swear by any of those things. Ultimately, when you do that, you're ultimately swearing by me anyway. He says, don't even swear on your head. Don't swear on your life. For you can't make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. The scripture describes Satan as the father of lies. That's just who he is. That's his nature. Satan is the father of lies. So when you don't tell the truth, when you don't keep your promises, you are more like him than you are like Christ. Christ equals truth. Jesus equals truth. I'm the way, the truth, the life. Jesus equals truth. Truth equals Jesus. But Satan equals lies, and lies equals Satan. And we find ourselves all too often comfortable with breaking promises, breaking oaths, not keeping our word. And what we need to do is we need to understand that goes against the very nature of God. God is truth. Jesus is truth. And whenever we become people of truth, we are acknowledging that we need to line up with him. God kept his promise to Adam and Eve. God kept his promise to Noah. God kept his promise to Abraham. God kept his promise to David. God kept his promise to Hannah. God kept his promise, and you can just kind of go through the scriptures to Solomon, to Saul, to Joseph, to Mary, to Paul. You can go through and you can look at his promises from Genesis to Revelation, and God is a promise keeper. And we as his people, Jesus says, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Be people of truth. People of truth. We at Northwinds, when we leave this place, we need to be known as people of truth. If I make a promise, whether it's to my work, whether it's to my family, whether it's to my wife, whether it's to, and you can fill in that blank, you keep your promise. Well, it's not easy, Pastor Dave. You don't understand. Truth and keeping your promises is not always easy. You think it was easy whenever the promise is, I'm going to send a Redeemer who will sacrifice for your sins? Do you think it's easy for God to see Jesus hanging on the cross and not have compassion for his son, his one and only begotten? You think that's easy for, well, he's God. That's what he was doing. No, he was following through on his promise because he loves you and he's a promise keeper, and he was determined to follow through in redemption. That wasn't easy to see his son there. Do you think it's easy for Jesus to hang there? Do you think it's easy for him to follow through on his promise of love to you? No, it wouldn't necessarily be easy, but it's part of his nature. And it's got to become part of our nature to be a reflection of who Jesus is. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. As we leave this place, we need to be determined to faithfully follow through on our promises, to be known in this community and in this world as those who are truth tellers, promise keepers, those who are going to follow through on their word. That's who we should be. We sang at the beginning, right before I started preaching. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper. Yeah, that's who God is. That's just not me. Jesus is calling us to a higher standard. And Jesus is saying to us, listen, the former standard was this. This is the low bar. Remind yourself of that. Just keep saying, that's the low bar. Telling the truth is the low bar. Following through on my promises, that's the low bar. The higher bar is this. You say, I'm making the promise. You don't have to swear on anything. I'm a Survivor watcher. Anybody watch the reality series Survivor? What is wrong with you people? There's like 3 of us. What's up with that? No idea. All right, so on Survivor, you'll find these individuals. There's different types of people that play Survivor, clearly. There's some who their gameplay is like, I will lie cheat, steal. I'll do whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. And they'll swear on their wife, their kids. They'll swear on their mother's grave. They'll swear on, you just name it, they'll swear on anything because they're like, doesn't mean anything anyway. And they'll break their promises over and over and over again. Now, in the game of Survivor, you look at it and you say, okay, I kind of get that. But do you realize that our culture has become a culture that no longer values or no longer insists that just the low bar is, if I make a promise, I'm going to follow through. And Jesus says, you as my followers, you shouldn't even have to seal a deal with a handshake. There's a guy, his name's Marcus Lemonis, and he has this program on TV as well. It's called The Prophet. And believe it or not, still in this day and age, he seals his deals with a handshake. But what Jesus is saying is you shouldn't even need that. Your word should be so good that all you have to do is say yes or no, and that's the way it is. Your word is your bond. But we don't live in a culture like that anymore. As followers of Jesus, that must be our standard. Because that's who God is. That's who God is. That's his character. That's his nature. Can you imagine coming in here? Can you imagine going through the time that we're going through? And having a God who might just, I'll just change. Yeah, I know I promised to never leave you or never forsake you, but not going to worry about that right now. You're on your own. Can you imagine like worshiping and serving a God? Can you imagine going through this time if that was what we were living with? A God who just, no, don't keep, well, that's God. We're just people. No, let's be people of the truth. Truth equals Jesus. Jesus equals truth. Lies equals Satan. Satan equals lies. Young people, trust me when I say you want to be known as a person of truth. Those of you that are a little bit older, you already know that. You already know that you establish your reputation in the community, at your workplace, in your family, of either being someone who is determined to follow the truth or being someone who, they said it, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do it. Keep your promises. Be a person of truth. That's who Jesus is. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the simplicity of it. None of us have a hard time understanding what you're asking us to do. Asking us to be a reflection of you. You are a promise keeper. You are a truth teller. You are an oath keeper. You keep your word. You have kept your word to us in every situation, in every circumstance. The promises all the way from Genesis to Revelation, you are going to either have kept those promises or you are yet to keep those promises. Not one of your promises has ever failed. And so, God, as we think about this and we think about being your image bearers here on the earth, your reflectors, the reflectors of your image, may we be determined to live out truth, to be reflectors of truth, to keep our promises in accordance with your word. May we not make up some lousy excuse. Well, I didn't swear on this. I didn't swear on this. No. May we be known as people of truth. Our yes is yes, our no is no, because we are people of Jesus. We are Christ's followers. We are disciples of yours. We are Christians. That means that we speak truth, we live truth, we hold ourselves to a high standard of keeping our promises. Lord, for someone in here this morning who maybe hasn't even come to a point where they have given their life to you, where they have realized that you did go to the cross to accomplish the redemption of all mankind, to save all the world from their sin. If they haven't yet placed their faith in you, I pray that today is the day that they realize their need for you. For those who have placed their faith in you, I pray that today is a day where they say, okay, this is just another one of those high bars where Jesus has raised the bar and said, okay, the low standard is you should always keep your promises. The high standard is like every single time. You don't even have to say, I swear by the Lord, I swear by heaven, I swear by Jerusalem, I swear by the earth, I swear by my own life. No. Help us to be people of truth, to keep our promises. And in that way, we positively reflect on your name rather than detract from it. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.